This conference will now be recorded. This
I hope
conference will now be recorded.
so I think some people have already attended, some people will be new to this session. So what we'll do is we'll just give a brief introduction about what SAP S/4HANA, from where it started to where it is currently now. Then we'll continue from tomorrow onwards with the regular setup because we're expecting some more people to join. So we'll keep this session short and we will start from tomorrow when everyone gets full-fledged so that we can start up with a normal pace of in which the classes will proceed. Yeah. Okay. So like last time when I hope some people would attended the demo sessions where we discussed about the roadmap which SAP was carrying forward, right? From the time we saw the R1 and R2 came in to what is currently there, right? In the SAP S/4HANA space, what was the need for SAP to get into these new technologies? Yes, as you're all aware, SAP was into the comfort zone of having a very sophisticated, a very comfortable ERP where they're doing well in the ERP business. Okay, what was the sudden need for SAP to basically look at new product lines into their portfolios? So basically, the reason being is basically the data, right? So now everyone is talking about digital, right? Where data is the core for any digital technology. So the entire world is talking about digital now. Every company you say they want to go digital, right? So they have a separate. If you see any company, big companies like TCS or Infosys, whoever is declaring their results, right? They keep a digital component separately, saying this is digital revenue, right? So that digital revenue, which is comparatively smaller now in terms of what the total revenue, but that is going to that particular digital revenue is going to expand because the future being entirely is on digital, right? When I talk about digital, because so basically because previously the data was very simple, right? So because we had only minimum number of data, of late the data sizes have started increasing and the data is getting complex, right? It was basically moving from a simpler mode to a complex mode. The complexity of all the data is basically reason being because one is basically there is exponential growth of all the digital information because everything is getting connected socially, mobilely, and all. And just because the data is getting complex, so we'll have to use all these big data concepts to convert all this because the data is all in for different formats. So it could be in the form of your text, it could be in the form of your audio, it could be in the form of your video. The challenge is, so when you have data in various formats, how to unify the formats and bring it onto one common database such that the data gets access from the database in a unified format. So that is where all these big data technologies are being used to convert all the structured and semi-structured data so that it gets into more of a structured format. So that the structured data is something that can be held in our tables, right? Because SAP or any ERP, because it's an RDBMS, right? Again, your S4HANA, your whatever database which was there previously on which your ERP was working, because ERP is enabled to handle to be put up on a RDBMS, right? So RDBMS again has the capability of storing the data in the form of your rows and columns, right? In form of your tables, which eventually stores the data in form of your rows and columns. So that is the reason exponential digital information, the growth of digital information that has led to SAP or any company now looking for all these newer technologies, right? Because they are building their own tools which can handle the data. So some tools are all built in-house in all service companies. If you see, all service companies started building the in-house tools, right? Which they can market it outside on a licensing basis. They started this activity, right? Because data is there. I told you it is getting complex day by day, and they need tools and they need the way of the technology to handle the particular data. Okay. And others basically all your globalization and your spread of business networks. So when you talk about a customers and partners, whoever is using who are using SAP or any ERP software, because it's a ERP basically it's a business oriented software. So when you start using the business oriented software, because and it's all used globally, so your customers and partners integrations are happening. So how do I handle all the integrations? Whether my existing ERP system or my existing ECC system, which is there currently in the market, is it is it having the potential to handle the entire complexity of all these business networks? Okay, so that is one of the these are the things that was adding to complexity of how what was existing in the ECC system. And the other is basically the Internet of Things. So when I talk about Internet of Things is basically it's about how individual machines or individual devices get connected, right? So by 2020-25, they're expecting around 200 billion plus devices to get connected, and each device will be talking to one another, right? When device talks to one another, their data gets shared. Again, there is eventual enormous amount of data, potential of enormous amount of data to get generated. So when so many things are getting interacted and so much of data is getting complex, getting generated, and moreover it adds to the complexity. So more and more data gets generated, and it all comes in different formats, as I said. And the pace in which the data comes in, right? The pace in which the data comes in, because it could be in the form of your milliseconds, microseconds, or it could be in hours, in a minutes or days, or it could be hours. The pace in which the data comes in, so that adds to more complexity of the data. Okay, so everyone is talking about real-time data, right? Now we are talking about something called as a real-time data. So because every business wants to see what is the data that is currently residing on which they can take a business decision. That was one of the challenging part for any business. Okay, because when you want a real-time data, the data processing capabilities of any system is at stake, right? Is a question. How fast the data gets processed? Because only when the faster processing capability of any system could be able to handle the real-time data, that's when the real-time concept will be still be maintained, right? Because even if the data gets older by to an hour or two, right? So what will happen is the data will not be a real time. So any business decision which is taken on that sort of data might not be that accurate as what is taken on a real time data that is existing currently. So basically, with all this technology, when you see when actually mobile started generating more and more data, because when people started using all the smartphones and all this handheld devices, right, which started generating so much of data. So basically, if you see for the past 5 to 6 years, you see that almost 90% of the world's data has got generated, which is not even generated for the past 30 to 40 years. 90% of the total data that is generated is in the past 5 to 6 years. And all the business networks, as I told you, customer partners, because the adoption of business network has grown by around 40 to 50% in the last 5 to 6 years. Okay, so by 2020, they're expecting 2020 or 2025, they're expecting more mobile users, because now people have started using the mobile. Even you see in a country like India, so how many people have actually started using mobile? Of late, in just last 2 years, thanks to networks like Jio, which has brought down the internet space, right, where it become feasible for anyone to use an internet now, right, of late. So that's the reason so many people started using internet, and people started using all the social networking sites, right? So when you start using social networking site, so when you see any particular product, right, any particular product or anything that has to be commented, right, you're free to lay in your comment there. So comment, or you can put in your feedback. So that feedback becomes a data, right? Because each information that is now getting onto the web now has become a critical information for any business to adopt and take a decision on that particular information, right? So that is where your business data is getting critical. Better business data is getting complex day by day, because even the users have started giving their inputs, right? The amount of users starting the input, so it becomes an analytical data store, for whatever information, it becomes a potential analytical data store for any company to analyze and get the meaningful results out of that particular data. Okay, so and moreover, you see, for the past 5-10 years, we are more into the cloud technologies, right? So SAP is into the cloud. Just in 2015, they entered the cloud, but all other companies were there into the cloud space, where they were having their existing infrastructure, and they were able to leverage the infrastructure to get more revenue for them and more benefits for the user as well. Okay, so because of all this, because of the use of mobile devices, the social media, and all these cloud technologies, so amount of data that gets generated and gets transformed is far more increasing day by day. So if you see almost 60 to 70% of the companies, when they report the majority of their people which are using the smartphones for everything from email to project management, right? Even at the company level, at the business level also, so much of data is getting generated. Because one part is previously it was all restricted only to your laptop and your desktop, right? Initially it was desktops. Off late, people started using laptops, but off late now everything is getting onto the mobile platform. So with all the advancements that are happening across to the lives, and which is provided because of the innovations that is coming up, so that is the reason the world is getting more smarter. So when people started to interact, that's when the smarter technology started arising. Okay, thanks to all the massive computer consumerization of IT, where people started using mobiles on all these handheld devices for all your online purchasing, online banking. So when you're completing online applications, right, everything there is a data, because anything is now getting online, right? You need not step out of your doorstep. Everything is available online. You click of a button, you get everything at your doorstep. So with all these things, when people start, when so much of interaction is happening between us as an individual and as a system, right? There could be a lot of data that gets generated. So that is where, when so much of devices getting connected and so much of data is getting coming in, so that is when it could be a human to human interaction, or it could be a human to machine interaction. Yes, when you have so much of data, there could be a lot of interaction that is happening. And when all these things are put up onto a digital network, that's when the data is valuable. And it is, and it often, if you see now, they're calling it as a new oil that is coming. They're terming it as a new oil. So it's how much of data coming in. So whether do we have the capability to process the particular data? Okay, because previously you have all single core processors in the system, right? So any data that gets into a processor, that used to be processed in a single core. Of late, you see multi-core processors started emerging. Okay, so of late you find more of a dual core processors, multi-core processors. So that's when your data that is getting generated is able to get parallelly processed. So with all the parallelism of tasks that is happening across the multi-core processors, so basically when it gets processed parallelly, which eventually increases the throughput of the system. When I talk about throughput, basically it reflects on the performance of the system, throughput of the data, and helps in faster processing, basically to give all your real-time responses for any business. Okay, and the other challenge was basically when you talk about because as I was telling, SAP has gone into something called as a HANA as a database, where all your data is residing onto the memory. Okay, when everything is sitting onto the memory, previously memory was very expensive, right? Memory is of late, if you see at a consumer level, right? If at all I want to buy a small 32 GB memory card or 64 GB memory card, now it is on an affordable space than around for 4 to 5 years back, right? It was very expensive. Yeah, 32 GB used to cost me around 30 to 2,000 bucks. Now 2,000 bucks. Now if you see, it is all the memory sizes have started coming down. So at the consumer level, if I can afford it, at an enterprise level, definitely a company can afford to store the data onto the memory. So that's when the big memory which was there, where a company was able to fit the entire memory into their budgets, and they could still be using the data and storing it onto the memory. Because previously you see all the data, all the database was all based on your hard disks, right? Because it is basically our database are all based on their rotating mechanical hard disks, and based on which the latency part was there, right? Because of the rotating hard disk, there, yes, of course there was a reliability part as well. the data was more reliable. But of late now, because when they say when with the concept of memory, in-memory storage came in, the reliability was a question. How reliable is my data? Yes, you say the data gets processed faster, the data gets pulled faster. How reliable my data was, right? But SAP, when they came out to the in-memory, yes, of late initially they were having the apprehension of how reliable my data would be, but of late they have done a lot of effort in ensuring that the data is reliable as well as faster in terms of how it gets processed in the system. Okay. And the other one is basically, so any system, as I told you, you have a CPU and there is a cache attached to it. How much of optimization would happen on that particular cache? So when I talk about an onboard cache, so any design on an onboard cache where the data would be passing through your memory and your CPU cores rapidly, right? That is where you have the data. That's when the cache will be between your memory and your CPU. So in the past, what was happening, even with the large memory, basically there was a bottleneck when all the CPUs which are processing the data, so they which are using, they were taking more amount of data that was getting processed. So with so much of data that got processed, my existing CPU and my cores on the CPU were not in a position to handle the particular thing. So with multi-cores that has happened, so my data is able to get passed through the caches of the cores. So it was able to easily set into my specific landscape. Okay. So that is one of the thing. And other thing is the cloud adoption. As I told you, the major challenge was because of late, how many companies do you think can hold a data center and they can they can install all the servers and the storage, everything, and finally still maintain the particular data? It's again because when any budget comes in, right, the budget gets allocated, some for the business, some for the IT, right? So when every company cannot, because every company cannot set up a own data center because so much of investment is there in a data center. On top of it, the managing the data is very complex now. So that is the reason companies like companies, all big companies are saying, I have my own space, I can set up a data center, whichever things that you require, your networking equipment, your servers and storage, everything I can put in my data center. I can give you an access to it. You pay for whatever you're using it, right? Tomorrow you say, I do not want to use the cloud services. We can cancel the contract and all the data will get rolled back to your system. So whatever data that you are holding it, we'll give the data back to you. That's when you talk about this, that's when the emergence of cloud technologies is taken a front seat in all this, on all these organizations now. And cloud technology which has been maturing, because when you talk about cloud technology, I told you from 2010 itself we have this cloud technology, and that has been maturing in the last few years. So because of this deployment option onto the cloud, so because customers are able to take up the complexity of any data and the installation cost, because eventually you come out on the installation, right? You don't invest much on the installation of your installation and all your maintenance of IT space, where you save that cost. That cost is put in back into the business. When that cost gets into the business, so I have more room or more budget for operating my business, rather than looking at IT as a where there are a lot of costs get involved. Okay. So because of this, because many companies, I told you, they're going on to the cloud. So a lot of virtual machines have started getting based on virtual machine, because all your enterprise-wide application, whichever was running on virtual machines, that is all getting used now. And so because all your public cloud services, right? You have your cloud, you have something called as a public cloud, private cloud, and a hybrid cloud. Public cloud is where you put all your non-critical information, right? And private cloud is where you put your critical information, right? Critical information where you have the access to that, and it is all secured in terms of how sophisticated the firewalls are being provided to you. So basically, when you have the public cloud services, which is based on the subscription model, all these public cloud services initially, because the private cloud and public cloud will have a major difference in terms of the cost, right? So when you talk about a public cloud, it is like you are taking a 3-bedroom apartment, and if you are having 3 people, and each people are sitting on residing, taking one particular bedroom, rather than taking a private cloud. If individually I am taking a 3-bedroom flat, I will have to pay the rent for all the entire flat, right? Rather than getting shared by 3. That's the difference between a cost that is incurred versus with the public cloud versus a private cloud. So with all these things, so that's where SAP said, now it is time for me to build my own database. So with all these things, because there are a lot of pain points, one part is exploding business volume, as I was talking about the data part, and all the new types of data. Because the data was generated using your machine, sensors, devices, with all the devices getting connected, all the social media that was helping in getting the faster and the more sophisticated data collections. So with all this data collection, they needed a system which was much faster at processing the data, right? When I have a system, when I need a system which is much faster processing the data, that is basically because my data should be real time and data should be in a position where I can take a business decision on my data, which will help me in accessing the information faster and which will eventually help me in my business decision making. Okay, so when you talk about a business, because business had its own set of challenges, IT had its own set of challenges. Because IT is basically concerned about whatever sits in their data centers, right? And what are the connectivity that it works in and establishes in the IT infrastructure part. So they were incurring huge cost, and their total cost of ownership was getting higher because of your existing old technologies, right? So they wanted to have some new technology because the inadequate technology which was existing, they wanted to capture, process, and analyze new types of data, which was because all these old processing capabilities of systems were not sufficient enough to handle this new data. So that is the reason, though, because there are a lot of dissatisfied business users. See, however good your product would be, until unless the business users get satisfied, only then it determines how good or bad your product is in the market, right? So however good technology used in the product, if finally it doesn't satisfy a business user, so that's when your product will not kick off in the market, because ultimately it is all used by the business users, right? So that is where your business users was having a lot of dissatisfaction in terms of how to process, because it was taking its own sweet time in processing the data. Okay, so when you talk about the business challenges, one part is, yes, they wanted to react faster to existing business problems that was there. How do you address the problems by seeing the real-time information? And they wanted to see if there are any uncovered opportunities. So when I talk about tomorrow you buy some product in an Amazon or Flipkart now, right? So you buy one particular product. So you are a potential customer for them to pitch in with all the alternate products. Suppose if I'm buying a laptop, so tomorrow I have a potential of buying the accessories for a laptop or a desktop, right? So how will they uncover these opportunities? Saying you are buying this, so tomorrow I can suggest you that you can buy your other peripherals of a computer, the desktop and laptop. So that is the reason now, with all these analytical capabilities, so with all this, thanks to all this new technology which is evolving now, so it helps in business and understanding a customer and meeting specific to the customer's needs of a customer, right? So that's the reason they are all able to reach out to you directly, and you are also having that sort of touch with the business, right? So tomorrow, where you also feel, okay, Amazon is caring for me, so in terms of suggesting me what are the alternate products, what are the possible combinations that I could buy. So that is the reason we get involved more in the business. That is the reason, that's where your involvement with a particular company also increases. Okay, so then business wants to have their own set of planning. So in terms of your planning, so it could be a budget planning, it could be a budget, it could be your material requirements planning, or it could be a planning of any sort, right? Ultimately, planning is one of the critical strategic side of any business. How good they plan is what, how good they would execute. If however good they are good in execution, if the basic planning goes wrong, or if the planning is not up to the mark, all these things, entire set of executions will go for a toss. That's the reason they wanted a system which will help them in their proper planning and forecasting. When I talk about a forecasting, it could be a sales forecast, it could be anything related to your production forecast. Forecasting could be on any sort. Financial forecasting. So forecasting is something what I'm going to see or what I'm going to see in future. So how do I forecast that now, sitting currently at this space? That's when my data is going to help me. And they wanted faster financial close process. So when I talk about a financial close process, if you're working on an ECC space, imagine at the end of the quarter, at the end of the financial year, your finance team has to spend almost close to 15 days to a month in closing all the transactions, right? So any FI consultants would know the pain of we're doing a month end, or month compared to month end, a year end closing will be much tougher for them. So they wanted a system which will help them in faster processing of all this information. So that finally my business could take a decision. And so that is when they decided in bringing up their own database. So when I talk about a database, what exactly is a structure that is there currently, to what exactly they put up. So with putting your database onto the memory, so they have basically reduced that 80 to 90% of the time which it takes from moving my CPU. So when you take this particular system, so suppose I request a particular user, right? He has to, any request that comes from a user will have to be returned back to the user with whatever request, based on which the request gets processed and it gets back to the user. So in this process, it gets fetched from the database. It moves to the memory, processing happens, further CPU, all the computations happen. Finally, it is given back to the user, whoever is requested for the information. So the question is not the data getting pulled up, how faster the data gets pulled up and how fast is able to see the required results. So that is when they said, when this was taking around 80 to 90% of the time, whenever the data has to move from your hard disk to your RAM, and it was taking remaining 10 to 20% of the time when it was moving from your RAM to the CPU, right? Because that's the data gets processed because of your cache that was it. So that's the reason now around 10 to 20% of the time they said, okay, it's good enough for me to process the data. I should eliminate this 80 to 90% of the time. That's when they put your hard database onto the memory. So that's called as an in-memory database concept that came in, which was the first time, because in-memory database was not new to SAP, right? In-memory database, what exists in-memory database, if someone has worked on something called as your APO systems, you would have heard of the term called live cache. That is basically helping in faster processing, because they're using a lot of BW data, right? Where your live cache technologies, because I'm not sure if people would have actually worked on APO, they would have come across this live cache as a concept. That is helping in faster, because you used to use your previous historical data and all your existing present data and all your planned data, right? With all these things, you're going to enter the planning. So with all this, for all these things, you need faster processing. Plus, they had acquired few companies which were there already having this technology, but they were maintaining a low profile. Okay, so there was a company called P Star Time. P Star Time. When I talk about a P Star Time, that was basically a company which was basically running on an in-memory thing. But only thing is it was maintaining a low profile. How many people would know a company that existed called as a P Star Time? So SAP went ahead and acquired that company. Okay, then they had acquired a company called Trex, which was basically basically search engine. That was on a optimized search engine format. So that's the reason they went and acquired that company. Plus they had their BW system, where they had their BW accelerators. Accelerators are basically the programs that used to help in faster data processing. Because your BW systems were handling purely your analytical data, your BW accelerators were this programs which was all run basically to help in faster processing of the data. Okay, so then they acquired a company you acquired a company called DB2. So with all these things, so much of thing, then they finally used all these technologies and they launched a product called HANA, which is purely used for analytics on the processing front. Okay, so that is where the birth of HANA. HANA is basically, as I told you, it's high performance analytical appliance, purely used for analytics. When you want to use it for analytics, the performance of the system has to be high. So when I talk about an appliance is a combination of my software plus hardware. So when I talk about the software is basically my SAP's license. Plus hardware is basically whatever hardware on which your software is going to reside. When I talk about a hardware, it could be your servers, storage, your networking equipment. With a lot of vendors are there, right? For example, you have a Dell, you have Cisco, you have Lenovo. A lot of vendors are there in the market. So how will they certify their devices? They cannot bring in some device and say, okay, install the software. It's not your desktop or laptop, right? Because it is all sophisticated software. SAP will put that into the particular hardware and then certify it, saying this is certified as an appliance, so that this appliance can get into the data center, be it my own data center if it's on a cloud, or SAP's data center is in the cloud, or any customer's data center. Okay, so how your traditional ERP was working? So because SAP HANA basically is purely on an high performance analytical appliance, you had your OLTP systems, right? OLTP is my ECC systems, and your BW systems are called as an OLAP systems. When you talk about an OLTP plus an OLAP, individually there are maintained as two different systems on the R3 space, right? You had a presentation, application, and database, and again your BW was again on an R3 system. Okay, so when you had a you have your presentation, application, database. So whenever data has to move from ECC to BW, it was taking its own time in getting processed, right? So they were your individual systems. So that is the reason SAP said, now with this in memory and your HANA being an RDBMS, let us combine the OLTP plus OLAP into one single system, so that a transaction gets created immediately, that gets started processing whenever the reports pull up as per the requirement. In real time, the data would get processed. That is where your entire thing is called as a OLTP plus my OLAP functionality into picture. Okay, then if you see these are the thing, because it's again an in memory, it's a columnar structure. Columnar structure, as I said, because they are all going into the columnar level tables. Previously it was all row based. Your reading and writing was happening in rows. Now it is the reading is happening, though writing is happening in the row wise, but reading is happening in the column, basically for the faster data read. That is where you have this columnar structure. Okay, because when you have such a platform, HANA database as a platform, basically which will help in data, combines your data processing, helps you in data processing and all your application processing, because they're working on all your planning data. It could be under processing of your text, because text processing is not that easy, because you have a text, like for example, any text that comes in, that has to be processed, and because it's all completely unstructured, how will it get stored in the table? How will my table know this is a text? It has to be in a structured format. That is where your text processing capabilities are also being used. And you have a spatial. When I talk about a spatial data, it is all based on the geo coordinates, right? When you have the set of geo coordinates, so how the data comes into the geo coordinates, and that is where that data can be extracted and it can be stored in my database. That is the capabilities which can be used for my own business, or it can be used, because when you talk about geospatial, a lot of government organizations use the geospatial data for all their forecasting. So that is where they use the geospatial data, and they take the geospatial data, how they further use for the analytics. So when you talk the roadmap, as I said, from R1 to R2 to R3, and that's when the 2012 they came out with BW on HANA, and 2000 they came out with Suite on HANA, and finally they came out in 2015 on S4 HANA into the logistics space. This is the roadmap that we saw it. So when you talk about any data, so the way your data was being used, because you have all the data that was getting stored in a database, and it was all getting copied to something called as an operational data stores in a system. And and the operational data stores used to your ETL tools, extraction transformation tools. In extraction tool, ETL tool, if you can remember, in the technology, in the IT space, previously it was even now it is called as an Informatica. You would have heard of this tool called Informatica. That is the most popular ETL tool, where it used to extract the data and it used to store it in a data warehouse. The data warehouse used to store all business data, be it your sales, procurement, or manufacturing. It could be of anything. And then further, they used to be bifurcating in something called as data marts. Data marts used to have specific log-wise data, where you have your sales data, you have your procurement data, you have your manufacturing. Individually, they used to hold it in data marts. And all these indexes, because you have your indexes and your aggregates. Indexes are basically how one table used to reference to other table. That is called as an index table. And aggregate is basically computationals, right? When I have all the data, I used to do all the computations used to be stored in a separate table, and further that used to get processed for my reports. That is where your aggregates and indexes were there. So when you talk about this query that gets passed on to your respective tables, and finally the query results and the calculation engine used to it, and finally the user used to get the result. But it was more complex in terms of how the user used to get the result. That's the reason with this in-memory database, so basically the performance has gone 1,000 times faster in terms of how the data gets processed. And basically, and they eliminated this aggregates and indexes, so that let it be on the fly. Let me not hold specific information onto the tables, because any small field in any customer master, vendor master, or for example a metal master that gets updated, imagine how much of index tables have to be updated. On top of it, how much of aggregates tables have to be updated parallelly. So when so much of parallel updations happen, it eventually brings down the throughput of the system. Just to keep the throughput of the system high, they have said aggregates and index have been eliminated, and all these aggregates and index will be kept as views. They will not be as physical tables. Those will be maintained as views in the system. Okay, so when you talk about the capabilities of SAP S/4HANA, yes, we'll be discussing all these capabilities of SAP S/4HANA in terms of how it is used for analytics, how it's used for simulations, for all your text mining. All these things we'll be discussing in our subsequent sessions. But as of now, we'll be discussing on basically, as I said, we will be discussing on the core structure. So we'll be starting eventually tomorrow, because tomorrow we're expecting more people to join. Once everyone joins, we'll be able to start off with these sessions on the simplifications front. Yeah, so that's where we'll be discussing in the next session. So this was an introduction about what we did, what we had covered in our demonstration sessions, plus what are the additional capabilities that HANA is carrying forward. So we'll close at this today, and we'll be discussing tomorrow in the next session. Once everyone joins,
So this session will be recorded, right? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Hello, yeah, Mrityunjay, your voice is breaking.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was just asking that this all session will be recorded, right?
All sessions will be recorded. So whatever you're seeing on the
Okay.
screen, you can take the recording.
Okay, that's fine. And question answer session can be in the middle of class, right? If anywhere,
Yeah, anytime. See, wherever you have a doubt, right? I don't keep it to the last, because there and there it gets clarified. Better to get it clarified.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, that is how it should be actually.
Yeah, because if you keep it to the last, something gets slipped in our mind. What we think we might not be. It would be better if you can.
Okay, Ram. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's it
Fine,
from my side.
Yeah, sure. Tomorrow, so Suresh will send you the invite for tomorrow's sessions as well. So we'll discuss tomorrow, and we'll take it forward with all the simplifications. We'll be doing one or two sessions. Discussions. Okay, sure. Thanks. Yeah. So we'll meet tomorrow. Yeah. Thanks for attending today's session. We'll meet again.
Thank you. Thank you, Ram. Thank you.